So this morning I wanted to come and talk to you folks a little bit about some of the principles of backup, offsite backup, disaster recovery. These are pretty important, of course, to IT as well as the company in general. Every organization, I'm sure, has a backup at this point. I'm sure most of you do backups. Not sure if you do offsite backups or disaster recovery, since most of you are under HIPAA. I'm thinking you must have some semblance of all of this type of things, but I wanted to talk a little bit about it to make sure that you guys have a good understanding. And so if you want to go out and look, um, we look all the time. We do our due diligence by at least once a year, looking at different products and technologies that are out there, from a backup or an offsite or a disaster recovery kind of basis, and see what's out there, see what's better, good, different, and then sometimes we switch, and sometimes we don't. For example, since um, we started with ArcServe as a backup platform. I don't know if any of you go back to those days, but then we took on Backup Exec, and then we took on other backup programs. There is a couple in between there, and currently we're working with Veeam as our backup platform. This talk will basically discuss the principles of these things, not actually necessarily the actual product or products that are involved. So I really want to just go quickly over, some principles to think about. Is your backup doing these things? Is your offsite backup having these things? Does your disaster recovery plan contain these things? And then open it up for questions if there are any, and then anything you guys want to talk about this month. So before we begin, the lawyers always want to say some stuff, but I don't really often follow what the lawyer says. I guess you can read the thing when it's sent to you, but to me, all of the disclaimers are basically that backup, offsite, and DR are really critical functions in any organization, and you should do a lot of due diligence before you implement any or all pieces of what we're talking about in this particular discussion. And I just don't think a hour-long presentation, and this isn't even an hour-long presentation, to build a backup, offsite, and DR plan from it alone. So, and also, please don't take that as a dare at all. So more or less, this is information. This will start you down a path if you don't have this path or one of these things in the three things. I assume everyone has, or please, I assume everybody has a backup, at least in their organization at this point. CT Comp offers a managed service for backup and a managed service for offsite and a managed service for DR. But this isn't really what this talk is about. I'm not here necessarily selling product at this point. I just will be using the products that we use as examples, or talk about some of them. Some of the pictures I've stolen are from Veeam or Azure or Wasabi and that type of thing. For our backups and DRs, we utilize all of these technologies: Veeam, Wasabi, Azure, PowerShell, a documentation product called IT Glue, along with VPN technologies from Cisco or Meraki and Microsoft Office are all incorporated in what we use for DR for ourselves and for our customers. So again, we do eat our own dog food. Our DR is part of this DR as a service type of platform. And some of the discussions that we'll be having are basic to that what we actually do. So you're going to get a little bit in the of what our systems talk about. So let's start with the backup and principles of backup. To me, backup is local to wherever you are, so your data center. This picture is, stolen from Veeam, but it does point out some of the things that I wanted to talk about and some of the verbiage that we use if you talk to us. So what you're looking at in a backup solution is something that backs up all of your stuff, whatever that may be. If you can find one product to do backup for everything that you have, then that's a good, start. I mean, to me, that's okay. That's worth looking at. And so, for instance, in the Veeam world, Veeam will back up VMs from VMware, which is the ESXi picture, or from Microsoft's Hyper-V, which is the Hyper-V picture, or physical Windows servers or physical Linux servers, and even PCs and Macintoshes. A lot of companies don't back up PCs or Macintoshes, but I hope to show you that maybe it's something you may want to consider in the future as part of your DR strategy. So what the arrow shows is kind of where the data flows. So what backup is all about is you have some sort of backup server. Veeam calls theirs the Veeam backup repository server, or the VBR server. And that's because it's connected to some sort of repository. Repository is a fancy name for storage in the Veeam world. And a repository could be disk that's on the server itself, or it could be a NAS device or a SAN device, or anything you want to store. It's a big chunk of storage is what repository means. And basically, that's where the data ends up going in a backup. So if you notice, it's all nicely wrapped up right in your data center. Of course, Veeam can extend this a bit and use multiple repositories in your data centers, that type of thing. If you have this kind of need or capability, Veeam is typically the product, especially if you're a Windows type of shop, if you're running a lot of Windows product and even Linux, Veeam is a solution to look at. And it also, while we're talking about backup, Veeam will also back up to the cloud. So that might be something in the future. Well, it'll back up from the cloud into the cloud. So that may be something some of you might be interested in looking at, something you might not have today. So let's talk about some of the principles that we see most of our clients looking at. And one of the things is to perform regular backup. So in other words, you want to do it in some sort of cadence, some sort of frequency. And how often you do that cadence really depends on how often your data changes and how important that data is to you. So in today's day and age, it's not unlikely to see backups of certain servers on a more frequent basis and other servers on a less frequent basis, and still make that part of, if you will, your daily or weekly, monthly, quarterly, hourly, all of these kind of times are all there. And this all points to, disaster recovery terms like RPO and RTO, where your RPO is how much data you'd like to lose, and your RTO is how long you can wait before you have to have this server back up and running, right? So those are the kind of the buzzwords you'll hear. So RPO is greatly affected by how frequently you back up. Of course, sometimes backing things up makes for a string of backups. So for instance, if you want to back up your data associated with a specific app, you might need to back up a web server, a backups, web server, a database server, and a indexing server, so really depends on how, detailed, rather than just backing up everything, all at once. Most clients back up at least once a day, sometimes 2 times a day, sometimes 4 times a day, but anything more than that generally you'd be using something other than just backup type of software, all right? Or it'd be using like snapshots and replication of the snapshots, those kinds of things. Something that I mention all the time, everyone's going to the cloud, everyone's using the cloud. The cloud is great, but if a oops happens, in other words, somebody deletes a massive amount of data in the cloud, there are sometimes no alternatives. You might have your cloud data in 64 different spots. I doubt it, but you could. But if you delete it all and that replicates to the 64 spots, you have no data. So it's important to get backup of your cloud data as well as your local data. So having a backup mechanism to back up cloud data is important too. And then finally, your backup server and storage. We no longer recommend that the backup server be in your domain because of the widespread use of ransomware. If you remember from our earlier or last month's talk, we talked about ransomware where the bad guys go and try to find an administrator's login. And if they get the administrator's login and your server's backup server is in the domain, guess what? Your backup is now encrypted. We don't recommend it being in the domain anymore. We don't recommend people using, you logging in as an administrator account. Your account should be just a plain old everyday user account and have a separate account when you want to be an administrator. So that you're limiting the effect of someone trying to steal your username and password. Um, you know, so again, very important. We don't put the backup server in the domain anymore, so it can't be affected by domain admins. In fact, domain admins can't even log into the server. Those kinds of things add to your mitigating of risks there. Only the backup software kind of knows the username and password that it's using. We use different usernames and passwords for every server we back up. Why? Because it's easy enough to do. So that if a bad guy does get one of those passwords, they're only bringing down one server. They can't bring down all your servers, that type of thing. So those are all, because ransomware has been gotten so bad that these are recommendations we now tell you to do with your regular backups. So something to think about anyway. Another principle of backup is having a copy of your backup, and that is redundancy. Some of our clients use redundancy just offsite so that they have two copies of their backup. Some folks copy it to 3 or 4 different places to have redundancy into their locations. It costs time and storage, but different things can have different hardware problems, those types of things. You're typically going to disk or to a tape today, and obviously if you have a hardware failure on your backup server, then that data may be gone, and so having multiple copies is important. And as I said, most of our customers have 2 copies, one locally on site for fast restores and one in a cloud somewhere, so that it's off-site and done. And other clients will have multiple copies, so they'll maybe have 2 copies in 2 different clouds, and the on-site, or maybe 2 on-site and one in the cloud kind of thing. I don't really see many customers doing more than 3, but I and most only do 2 for our client base, for our client size, which is small clients, and let's get rid of the small. Microsoft determines small is 2,500 seats. So if you don't have 2,500 users, you're considered small to Microsoft. So most of our customers are in the small range. In fact, most of our customers are 250 seats or less. So those kinds of things are important. Another principle of backup is that it should have some sort of automation. Um, Most of the backup software today, at least, will have a user interface, which they call UI. Again, something graphical that you can use rather than in the old days, it used to be, command line, type stuff in and back it up. And most have some sort of automated scheduler. So as part of the backup process, you define a schedule for how often you want to run this job. And again, that'll determine your RPO or by your RPO, how often you need to back up this particular data. And of course, the snapshot is from Veeam's schedule. And as you can see, today's day and age, you can actually do it in almost any way you want. So you can see that there are, hours, and you can see monthly, and you can see daily, and so you can set it up daily, weekly, monthly, hourly, etc. With the Veeam graphical scheduler. And then basically other software have automation like PowerShell or RESTful API access. So you can see Veeam has a PowerShell reference. Veeam also has a REST API, so that if you actually wanted to start automating processes or programming, if you will, somewhat programming, PowerShell is a scripting language, not a programming language. But if you want to program some of this, you can actually automate it more fully to do fun things like your disaster recovery, for example. We use a combination of APIs and PowerShell to do our disaster recovery as a service for our clients, which basically takes the user fingers out of the pie and makes it automated. So something to look at if you ever played with something like PowerShell before, to dabble in it a little bit. Another principle of backing up is making sure that the backup is good, which is called verification. Verification includes checking your logs. So every time a backup runs today, it will generate a log showing you whether things are good or there are errors or there are warnings, and you should periodically check that particular log to make sure that it's okay. If it doesn't say that it's okay. So if it says it's got warnings or if it's got errors, you should make sure that you understand what's going on there to make sure that your backups are successful enough to be restored when they're needed. In today's day and age, there's tons of warnings that get generated that are almost like static or, not important. But until you know which ones are and which ones aren't, and that may need, going to the vendor and their help desk and finding out, you need to look at them. How often? CT Comp recommends that every time the backup runs, you look at the logs. So yeah, that could be somebody's full-time job. In fact, we at CT Comp have a couple of people doing it full-time, so that the backups are always checked. And to make sure that they, again, can be restored. Then we also recommend that at least annually you test the backups by physically restoring a file or a server from the backup to a test location, to make sure that you are able to get them back. Of course, if you're a company or an organization that restores quite often for folks, somebody loses a document or something and you go and pull that out, well, that to me is a good test. Did you recover that file or that folder or that server successfully? And that would meet the needs of that annual testing for that server, if you will. But something to think about. Do you have a backup testing procedure in your environment where you do it periodically? And then there's the fact that full backups, when you back up everything, it costs you time, it costs you disk space. And so quite often, most folks do not implement a full every time backup, either because it would take too long all the time, or um, it would take too much disk space to do it. So consider the differential or incremental backup strategies. Um, Incremental strategy, use the least amount of disk space, but take the longest amount of time to recover. And differential backups take more disk space every time you run them, but are faster to recover. And if no one's ever told you what that's about, is that if you drop the full off of the right side of my picture and you had only those differentials, incrementals, and fulls, well, if you're doing differentials to recover, you first have to restore the last full that you had and the last differential that you had. And that recovers that, if you will, whatever the backup is, say a server. If you're using incrementals, you would recover the last full first and then every incremental in order. So you'd have to, in our picture, restore 4 incrementals to get the server back up and running. So as you can see, differentials will take more disk space, but will recover quicker. Fulls obviously take the least amount of time to recover if all you're doing are fulls, but it takes the most disk space. And then incremental are faster and save disk space. So it's really whatever, but take longer to recover. So it's really whatever you need to deal with. Is disk space more important than time? And again, that gets back to your RTO, your recovery time objectives. So differentials are faster than incrementals, that type of thing. And as long as your RTO is satisfied, then I would go with differentials, but differentials cost disk space. So, as long as you had the space, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to weigh all those options and consider them all, and then make your final decision based on that. So that's kind of that square in the upper left-hand corner of this picture. We're getting data to backup to a backup repository, if you will, somewhere on site. We did mention that we could make a copy of that data and send it to another repository in a different location, or even a different repository on site, right? So if we extend that to just bringing it to the cloud, you now know what offsite storage is about. So offsite storage is really making a copy of your repository and sending it to someplace offsite, whether that be Azure or Amazon, or our choice is Wasabi. Why did we make the choice of Wasabi? Couple reasons. One is Wasabi is actually BIT compliant with Amazon Web Services. So from a technical basis or an API basis, it's the same as working with Amazon Web Services. They won't tell you, but I'm pretty sure they somehow have it backed into Amazon, like they're using Amazon, services on the backside of their stuff. But anyway, it's BIT compliant with Amazon services, but a lot less expensive. That's kind of what their whole guts are. So Wasabi to us was attractive because the pricing of Wasabi versus Azure or AWS is, I don't know, at least half as expensive. Wasabi gives you the most explainable price tier. It's $6 a terabyte a month. Done. Whether you put data in or take data out, you pay $6 a terabyte. Try figuring that out with Azure or AWS. If you figure it out, you're good, because Azure and AWS actually charge you for in some cases egress when you're pulling data out of it, or in some cases when you're either putting data in or out of it. But anyway, it adds up to well more than what Wasabi does. So that's kind of why we chose Wasabi as a cloud repository. They have locations throughout the United States as well as around the world. For most of our customers, we tend to stick with US facilities. I don't think we have anyone in outside the US, because again, if you're putting your data from, say, here in Connecticut to Oregon, I think that's a pretty far distance to not have to worry about electrical outages or whatnot. And the other thing is the whole government thing of your data and seeing your data in different locations, that type of stuff. So our clients mainly stick to the US, and most of them, because they're in Connecticut and, you know, more or less Massachusetts, Rhode Island, tend to stick their data either in central or west coast places. So again, that's what we do. Veeam has a direct connection to Wasabi. So it knows what Wasabi is, it knows what AWS is, it knows what Azure is, for those that are taking notes. And you can create a repository in each of those or any of those clouds, much like you create a repository right on your site. You fill out a screen and boom, you're talking to it. Obviously, you're going to be paying money to these vendors or to some vendor to do that. So again, you're going to then back up on a regular basis, and on whatever that basis is, typically you're going to copy that backup up to the cloud repository, and that's kind of the basis of how it works. But we put another word in front of offsite storage. So the offsite storage is pretty easy, but making the backup immutable is the you know, key here for at least for me, for why you'd want to use something like this. Immutability by definition means you can't change it, which is kind of interesting. It doesn't mean you can't delete it, but it means it can't be changed. And what you want to do with backups is, or at least some of your backups, is isolate them. In the old days, we used to use, I say old days, some of you may actually use tape still, but in the old days, everyone used tape. And that was isolation. In other words, you ran a tape, you took the tape out of the machine, if you're holding it in your hand, it's isolated from your network. A bad guy can't come in and destroy that tape because it's not connected. So what logical isolation is the ability to use some tricks and tips. Wasabi calls it S3 object lock. S3, by the way, is is an Azure reference, and that object lock effectively makes a logical air gap between them. It uses encryption as well as other techniques. There is a pamphlet there. I actually put it in the slides so that if you wanted to read that pamphlet, the PDF, you can go get it, or you can email Dusty or myself and we can email it back to you. It's that brandfolder.io isn't anything. It's what Veeam and Wasabi use for a portal to send information to customers rather than using their own bandwidth. So it's not anything bad to worry about. And again, if you are, that's fine. Just email myself or Dusty and we'll send you that PDF. But it gives a little bit more technical definition of what the logical air gap is, which will make it logically isolated, as well as immutability means that even an administrator can't change the data. So even if you're attacked by ransomware and I have the administrator, the root, whatever you want to call it, the grand poobah of security on your site, you cannot change the data on that. Immutability works with a time password, a time lock. And so therefore, once you make it immutable, it can't be changed until that time, or can't be, in some cases deleted until that time lock expires. So those are important. So now, why is offsite important? Well, I always go in my DR talks, I always talk about the smoking crater. In other words, you drive to work one day, you get to work, and there's a smoking crater there. So if you don't have offsite storage, your on-site storage is gone. And now your business is done because your data is gone. So having data in a spot outside of your space is a good thing. Some people have multiple locations and transmit data to that other location, which is, making it offsite. But what I find is the pricing that Wasabi offers and having it immutable, and making it way off site, like California, or if you want Paris, or Europe or Asia, or wherever you want to stick it. And again, most customers are sticking it in the West Coast. If you're worried about the West Coast, you can make it Chicago area. But again, that's pretty much offsite enough that if a hurricane hits Connecticut, the data should still be okay in Chicago, or most things that I can think of in terms of risk mitigation for the offsite backup is, if it's far enough away, you're safe. And Chicago seems to be okay. West Coast may be okay. Some people argue that the West Coast may have an earthquake and go under. Okay, so go underwater, I mean. So again, that's why I say Chicago. Some people pick too. So that's that. So immutable storage is often compared to worm technology as well. So worm is write once, read many times. It's a strategy that if your backup can do worm, then I recommend it. Or if you know, can't really, do anything, get a worm drive and back up your data to the worm drive. And basically that gives you read-only protection, which again stops the problems of I deleted everything, I got ransomware, those kinds of things, because they can't be written to. And again, your immutability period, which is the lock on how long that stuff can't be deleted or written to, is based on your, whatever your compliance is, however long you actually need to see, however long you need to see that. So again, somewhat important. Anyway, and then I expounded, although we've already talked about it, on the object lock already down in the bottom.
I love the cartoon.
Yeah, I did that especially for you, Dusty, because
I'm stealing that off the presentation.
and you can. You'll notice the disclaimer says you can take it and use it as long as it's educational.
Thank you.
Because I stole it from someone else anyway. So, another point of offsite storage is versioning and retention. Keeping multiple versions of backups and retaining them for an appropriate period of time will allow you to have points in time that you can go back to in case of actual, deletion and data corruption. And where we recommend doing that is with Wasabi. One point to mention, Wasabi is also HIPAA compliant, since you guys are all in the healthcare field. So it is safe, if you will, to work with any kind of compliance that you might need for HIPAA. And and what we mean by and the price like the price point's pretty good. So if you want to have multiple file, to me file servers are typically the ones that people either database servers or file servers are where multiple versions might help with the oops factor. Specifically, the user deletes a folder, doesn't realize they deleted it for a month, and then goes to use something in that folder and says, oh god, it's gone. um at like at $6 a terabyte, it doesn't cost a lot to, even if you need 4 or 5 or 20 terabytes, um to retain a couple copies of your server, um you know even if it's just your document server, those types of things. I also mentioned that shadow copies can help in certain cases where you need to get something back. You backing up once a day and they deleted it today and tell you that, oh, I deleted it. Well, a shadow copy can help there by bringing it back right from the server itself. But again, there's that. Again, this one points to wasabi.com. There's a HIPAA white paper that you can go grab and read about the HIPAA um, compliance that Wasabi brings to the table. So that's always good. And finally, a little bit about disaster recovery. So if you look, the very first picture, the backup is a lot smaller now, and then we have the picture of the cloud repository. And what we do with disaster recovery is we restore to a cloud. Um, we use Azure to do this. What we do is we create a Veeam server, a VBR server up in the cloud. We connect that server to the repository over at Wasabi, and then we then restore the VMs or anything that was backed up. We restore to VMs in the cloud. So even physical machines on your site that are backed up into that repository get restored as VMs in the cloud. And that happens automatically. That's one of my favorite words. So Veeam knows how to do that. Veeam knows how to take a physical server, make it a virtual server, and put it in the Azure cloud as part of a restore. So literally, you're doing a restore. And if you're really good, you can automate that. So if you automate it, then everything just happens kind of by script or by whatever you're using to automate it, which is all good. All your servers are up there, but how do you use them? And that's always our biggest concern. A lot of vendors sell DR by saying, okay, you're all done. We got your servers back. You know, now you're all set. The problem is how do you actually use those servers when you're in a disaster? And so, of course, Azure takes care of that by allowing you to create VPNs. We're a Cisco shop, so Meraki, Cisco VPNs are available. Microsoft has its own VPN. The VPN software is free. So if you don't use VPNs or you don't have the Meraki's or Cisco's of the world VPNs, you can literally use Microsoft VPN to in the event of a disaster to hop in and go. If you have multiple sites and the site is up, you can create a site-to-site VPN with Azure and just start running. If you are, don't have other sites, you can do point to site and you can do it from therefore your machine as long as it has an internet connection to anywhere. So you can be at home in the case of a disaster, you can be in a hotel, and you can run both of those at once. So if you have a site that's still running, you can do site to site. The users there wouldn't have to do anything. The point to site, the user typically will have to load up a VPN piece of software on their machine, usually hopefully before the disaster, or i.e. at the first test before the disaster, and then get in that way. So, uh, and then basically, that's how that typically will work in a disaster for you. One of the things that we offer for our smaller clients, and again, smaller just means that your RPOs and RTOs are a little bit flexible. In other words, you don't have um, a 10-minute RTO. But we basically start with a blank cloud. In other words, you can have nothing in Azure and then DR to Azure when you need to, so that you're not paying any costs until the DR happens. In order to do it efficiently, it all has to be kind of automated, and that's what we've done a lot of work on to get it automated. And go from there. So like in our DR facilities, we'll have the VBR server up in the cloud and everything registered with Azure, ready to restore in 10 minutes. So, give me 10 minutes and I can have a up and running VBR server connected to Wasabi, ready to recover your VMs. Of course, the actual recovery depends on how many little blue boxes that you would have, right? So if you have 1 or 2 servers, your recovery is probably 20 minutes total. If you have 22 servers, you've got a little bit longer than that. And again, size is everything with backups and recovery, right? So depending on the size of the data, that kind of stuff happens. And so we kind of look at DR, at least I do, in that way. Can we start with nothing and get you to your RTO and in time? And if we can't, then you have to just start doing other things like having machines in Azure all the time. So again, if you can't meet your RTO, you have to put some machines up there. So maybe your domain controller sits up there and you have AD running all the time up into Azure. Or maybe your file server is so large that you put that up in Azure and, in one of your copy jobs, if you will, or you set up, DFS and have the system automatically go up to Azure every time anyone changes anything, that type of stuff. So again, it's something to think about, and no matter what your RTO or RPOs are, you can make this type of technology work. It may not be, if you will, cloudless to begin with, up in the DR site because of RTO, but you can certainly get it to run. And so that's what we do. We consult with our clients as well on that, to make it work. In order to understand, and I'm sure most of you have already done something like this, you create a team of folks that goes out and does what's called a business impact analysis, or you hire a bunch of people to come in, or a company to come in and help you with this. And basically it takes as input your systems, your application, your data, puts a weight on how critical things are, and then spits out a restore point objective, which again is how much data you can lose back to. So can you lose back a day? Can you lose back 3 days? Can you lose back a month? Or can you only lose back 10 minutes? And then your RTO is how long you can be without that when you have a disaster. So that's the RTO. And this aids in what we call your business continuity plan. So this analysis is pretty important to do to get a realistic look. And what I recommend is you first have to get management approval. I assume a lot of you are the IT management side of life, but you'll need everybody's approval because this isn't a pretty thing. Those of you that have done it will probably agree with me. But every book I've ever read on BIA says you want to start off with a questionnaire and email it to your people. I don't know about you, but every questionnaire I have ever made and sent out to my people, the following happens. That's right. nothing. You don't get it. Well, maybe one guy that's working with you sends the questionnaire back, but that's it. So don't even bother with questionnaires, I tell people. Do one-on-one interviews. If you feel it's important, and again, if you're going to meet with everyone, then meet with everyone one-on-one. You want to try to be consistent with the questions that you do in the interview. So don't ask, people from the same department different questions, because that's not gonna help. And don't make them too long. Because if you got to do 200 people and you got to do 200, 2 to 4 hours each person, that's a lot of time. So again, management has to, make sure that they know that you're going to be taking somebody out of their job for 2 hours, and you're going to be out of your job for 2 times the amount of numbers that you're going to process, if you will. So again, what you want to do is, when you're doing these things, is meet with the people, get their answers from them by talking to them, and then meet with senior management after or often during the process to verify what you're seeing, and seeing if they are agreeing with you. And then attempt to align the results with your current IT initiatives and figure out where we're falling short. And then you have to weigh the cost of that loss to the cost of recovery and whatnot. There are quite a few books on this subject. There's quite a few consultants that work in this area to help if you need that type of that help. Hiring a consultant may take a process that seems doom and gloom and you don't really understand, to something that's doable and attainable. If you actually go to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, there's actually a business impact analysis template. The last time it was updated was during the pandemic time period. They mustn't have had a lot to do, so they updated their thing, but I'm sure that Medicare and Medicaid had some things to do during the pandemic. That's just a little joke. Anyway, but if you go to that site, cms.gov, you can find their business impact analysis template there to help out, or to just take a review if you want to take a review. Then you need to develop a comprehensive plan that outlines your procedures and how to recover the systems, testing protocols, etc. Like I said, some people use a service to do this. In other words, I call my provider and they do the DR as a service for me. That's my entire plan, or TR. And again, if you're doing it on your own, my first disaster recovery plan with any client is the smoking crater that I mentioned before. To me, why do I start there? Because every other DR scenario you can think of is a subset of that. So if you can recover from the smoking crater, you can recover from anything with just modifications of the plan that you build by having nothing at all, no building, no nothing. So you also have to understand that some or all of key personnel are gone. Since I'm talking to IT people, I say that you happen to predict this week, or take this week for PTO, and you're on an island that you can't get back to Connecticut at the moment for whatever reason, versus the bomb going off in the building when everybody's there. Your senior management, I give them that exact spiel, is that, it's during the day and the bomb goes off. How do you get your DR back? And I'll tell you now, disasters, even small disasters, can affect people mentally. You drive in by your work that you've been to for 15, 20 years, and it's, burnt down. It affects you mentally. So are you able to execute a DR based on, after seeing the building burned down? Can you do that? You don't know until it happens to you. You can say sure, but the first thing that happens during a disaster at least what they say, is that people tend to nest. In other words, they don't want to come into work. They want to stay home and be with the people they love and whatnot. So again, a detailed step-by-step plan is needed. And when I mean detailed, it's almost should be where anybody that has a computer can pick up the document and go step by step and do the restore. Why? Because maybe it's, some guy that's really good with a PowerPoint presentation like me, having to go through and restore your disaster, or recover from your disaster. So again, those are kind of important to remember. The other thing is that a principle of DR is to test it regularly, and you'll read in the book that that testing is part of DR, and you can do tabletop testing and whatnot. What we recommend is a full DR restore test at least annually. So, once a year, you restore the entire environment and test it with whoever you need or a set of people so that they know that you can get the thing back. You can get the thing back. You learn a lot as you go through this year after year. The first year, you learn the most. And then after that, it's less learning, but just now confidence that you are getting things back. Tabletops are still done. I recommend that they be done either quarterly or semi-annually. Some people even do it monthly. The folks doing a monthly really are doing it as more of sure, we're going to test some stuff out on a tabletop, talking about it, but also that time is used for training, refining, and maintaining of the DR. Talking about what's new, what needs to be checked better, what didn't work well, what's working well, that type of thing. And then documenting and procedures are of course critical. So a lot of the tabletop time is used for documentation and creating the procedures and whatnot that you end up having. Again, that disaster recovery should use offsite storage or replication to get the data to the site that you're restoring to. And the documentation, there's a lot of templates out there. If you don't have one yet, I assume a lot of you may already have DR documented, but if you don't, there are free templates to get you started. Just Google disaster recovery template and you'll find a whole bunch of free ones. You'll also find a lot of companies selling it, so just be careful that you do your due diligence and check a few links, and not necessarily the top links. So I thank you for your time, Glenn, and we're truly hoping to grow the council in LeadingAge. This is the second month that we're doing it. I'm going to open it up to you for questions if you have any. But one of the things I'd also like is input from the council. I know a lot of people aren't here, but to start getting input for these kind of presentations, rather than me picking something. If you have some ideas or a list or something, feel free to let me know. So I'll turn it to you, Glenn, for a minute.
Well, thank you very much. It was very informative, and I do not have any questions.
Okay.
I am a member of both the HR council as the director of HR, and now this one as director of IT.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of information.
Yeah.
Hey, Glenn, there's a lot to digest there. Do you guys currently, do you have a DR initiative, or do you have something in place now?
Yeah, we have an MSP,
Okay.
Compass MSP, that handles all of this. We review it on an annual basis, and that review is coming up within the next couple of weeks.
Okay. And when they review it with you, do you actually do tests, like restore servers and test them, or?
I don't do the tests, but they show
Okay.
me the
The
results of the testing. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, as long as they're, as long as, like I said, I would demand at least annually to have my stuff restored and have, your IT folks at least. I recommend everybody test or some of your organization test it. So, for instance, since you're in charge of HR, have some of the HR people get on and make sure they can do their HR stuff. Make sure the clinical people can get on and do whatever they need to do, clinically. And often there's like a DR, if you will, committee in your environment where you pick one person from or two from each of your departments or whatever you want to call them, and they sit on this DR committee with you, and that's the team that leads the test, and they bring in X number of people, however many they need to ensure that their stuff is there and that they'd be able to use it. And so that's kind of our recommendation.
Glenn, if you ever want another point of view or you want to discuss this further, this is a lot to go through and it seems overwhelming, but with the right tools in place, the disaster recovery is a lot easier than it used to be. God bless the cloud, right? So we've offered it since the 90s because we have a lot of at that point they were kind of the only regulated folks with the local banks, right? Financial institutions.
Right.
And it seems like everyone has some type of need for disaster recovery, and it's being driven a lot by regulations, but also insurance companies now, right? So you're hearing from all those guys. So the bottom line is we can help with any part of the process. And if you ever want any information, just drop a note to John and I, and we'd be happy to help you any way we can.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to be cognizant. Yep.
Sorry, what I was just gonna say, what I can do is when I send out the email up regarding the YouTube link and the slides from today, I can ask
Yep.
people for their input on what they would like to be discussed in the next council meeting, if that would be
Okay.
helpful for you.
Yeah, and the other thing is I realized my email address I didn't put in the slide that I sent to you.
Okay.
So if you can just either use my email address there, or you have my email address
Yep.
Anyway, but if you can send that along, because I actually do want input from folks
Sure.
rather than just me picking topics. Glenn, do you have anything on top of your mind at the moment, or just
I do not.
blasted your mind into oblivion for an hour? So yeah, if you think of something, certainly come up with something. Some of the things that we offer our clients came from clients saying or people saying, hey, do you have something on this topic? And we'll do it. So like I said, to me it's not we handle a lot of different companies, not just healthcare companies. So we may have technologies and things in play that you guys don't or want to talk about. So
Understood.
so no problem.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Al.
guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye.